presentation today is about evolution of good and evil, and we have Anthony presenting. Let's give him a hand. I'm going to the back.
Yeah, hello guys, my name, well, of course you already said, Anthony Elisarraraz. Oh yeah, so I just wanted to start with asking the question, how would you guys categorize like good and evil? Like, what is good and evil? Like, if anybody can share.
Good is like having empathy and like being able to, sympathize with like your fellow human. And evil is like, you just really only think about yourself. Like evil is just bad. Everything bad encapsulated.
Oh, actually, yeah, that's how I would actually categorize it too. I mean, do you guys agree in my categorization of good and evil? And of course, it's actually relative. It varies by population and individuals. What you consider good may not be good for other people. And so, of course, but I still need to categorize good and evil. Perhaps I would say that it's universal, maybe. Good, altruism, cooperativeness, evil, selfishness, aggression, just how he said. Yeah, so the definition of selfishness is just you get a benefit and somebody else gets a cost. And as philosopher Ayn Rand said in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, it is actually known as evil. Selfishness. Yeah, it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. She also argues in one part about selfishness when it comes to love. You might say that when you actually sacrifice yourself for someone, well, for a loved one, you can argue that it is altruism. However, it is actually more of a selfishness. That's what she argues, just because it would actually lead to negative consequences emotionally. Perhaps you will not be able to deal with your loved one dying, and so you're trying to prevent that. So she argues it's selfish. Yeah, and altruism, you receive a cost and somebody else receives a benefit. I don't know, can anybody tell me the cost? I mean, here's a helper, but can anybody see a potential cost? What is it actually costing him? Well, I would say energy. So there's always a cost. Yeah, and the selfish gene by Richard Dawkins, he actually talks about how genes act in selfish ways just because all they want to do is survive and replicate. For example, mitosis, meiosis, cell division, and of course how we create genetic coupling. And genes are actually competing with each other to be in the next generation. And so to survive and to be in the next generation, they actually have to design a vehicle, like actually someone who can do that. Yeah, just one fact, the word meme actually comes from him in the book, which just means transmission of ideas. And the parental investment it's just any resources towards the offspring. It could be energy, time, just anything that increases survival or reproduction. When it comes to females, they actually have the highest parental investment just because of they have an obligatory parental investment. For example, gestation, lactation. Obligate would be gestation. You are actually forced to invest resources into the offspring. And this can actually lead to the discrepancy of what the offspring wants and what the parent wants, is willing to actually give. The child can actually influence getting more nutrients, and it can actually be costly for the parent, leading to even death, just as you actually need more calories, more energy just to sustain and to be able to make the baby develop. In this context, we can actually consider the mother altruistic and the offspring very selfish, by definition, of course. Yeah, and so there was actually a study done in the Amazonian mothers during resguardo, which just means that there's a period of rest after giving birth. So they actually have to rest. They have to get more calories in, and to do that, some strategies would just be just resting, just because it takes a lot of energy to just produce milk, and it all revolves around social support. For example, there was two groups compared: social support versus no social support. Social support, they were able to have energy balance, less weight loss, high carb intake, and more energy. In this context, of course, selfishness is offspring, and all mother and the family are just being altruistic. Yeah, so when it comes to inclusive fitness, it is just energy intake, and you take that energy and put it towards reproductive success. Indirect fitness is just enhancing relatives' reproductive success at the cost of oneself. So you might also be wondering, like, well, isn't altruism from an evolutionary viewpoint actually detrimental? Doesn't make sense. Like, shouldn't we actually be selfish just because selfishness would actually enhance survival? Well, being altruistic does actually offer a survival advantage towards alleles that are similar to you, your relatives. So Hamilton's rule is just RV is greater than 0, which is just the relatedness of coefficient. For example, the parent offspring is just 0.50% relatedness. Your granddaughters would be 0.25%, times the benefit towards the relative must be greater than the costs incurred to you. So the cost would be your reproductive success. Yeah, so there was a study done on just cooperation. In the first study, they were actually testing your willingness to help someone, and it turns out that those with high level of need are more willing to be helped, which is kind of obvious. In the study 2, they actually added a recipient's willingness to sacrifice. So the person who had the potential to help, they were aware if somebody was willing to sacrifice, and it turns out that if they were unwilling to sacrifice, they were less likely to actually help them. Thus, willing to sacrifice is actually important in actually helping someone. And the third study, they just mixed the variables, but for example, they first added the willingness to sacrifice, and then they were told about the high level of need, and it was still the same results. You're more likely to help someone if they were actually willing to sacrifice in the past. And some Unless, of course, you have, yeah.
I have a question. For study number 2 and study number 3, I'm trying to understand. If the person will sacrifice only if they see or they know that there is a history of sacrifice in the past with the person that they need help. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And the same for study number 3.
Yeah. It's just a mix of variables. Like they became aware of the willingness to sacrifice first, and then they told about their higher level of need, just to see if forgetting was was actually influencing that, and it turns out it really wasn't influencing that.
Okay, so there are like not necessarily 3 different studies. It's one study.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
In 3 different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
Okay. 3 different groups, 3
Mhm.
different variables. Okay.
So yeah, why was willingness to sacrifice imperative for them? Just because it signaled long-term cooperative relationships. Oh yeah. So this is actually the brain of a chimpanzee, and this is actually the testicle size of a chimpanzee. As you can see, they're actually quite the same, relatively the same. Now you may be asking, why am I actually talking about and showing you guys this? Well, it's because it turns out testicles actually have to do with your mating system, the type of mating system, and the species. For example, gorillas actually have a relatively small testicles, and they actually are polygyny, which means like one male, multiple females. Whereas chimpanzees, they have larger testicles, well, as you can see, and they actually are polygynandry, which just means that they're promiscuous, which just means that they actually mate with multiple people, just everybody's mating with each other. And same, of course, with bonobos. And humans, well, compared to a chimpanzee, humans actually have relatively smaller testicles. And so you may be asking, well, according to this information, what are humans? And of course, there's variation when it comes to the mating systems in humans. And so we're actually odd. But according to this data, we're biologically wired to be more polygyny or monogamous, just because of the small testicles. And of course, and there's also some arguments that we should actually be promiscuous, polygynandry, but then this is actually contradicting because, well, the testicles, yeah. Oh yeah, so the reason why there's a selective pressure for larger testicles is because of the intense sperm competition, and promiscuous species, it is actually advantage to have large testicles just because you actually produce more sperm and they swim faster, and this is actually an advantage when everybody's mating with everybody. So, yeah. Oh yeah, and just wanted to show for example, chimpanzees is 118 grams, gorillas 29, and Homo sapiens on average 40 grams.
Would you repeat that information if we did?
Oh yeah, sorry. Chimpanzees have 118 grams, gorillas 29 grams, Homo sapiens 40 grams.
You're talking about that?
Yes.
Okay. There's a question about that.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how that relates to altruistic or selfish behavior.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about it like in a second. Yeah, I'm not just putting it like a random. Yeah, it all makes sense in the. Yeah. So talking about testicles, it actually correlates with your parenting abilities, your actually nurturing abilities. For example, the bigger the testicles you have, the less likely you are to actually take care of the children. When it comes to parental investment, one of the main factors why males actually have less, another reason is that there's anisogamy, which just means a different size of gametes. Males actually have smaller, which is like the sperm, compared to the actually egg. the egg is more costly, whereas the sperm is not really that costly relatively compared to females. And so, in theory, males can actually reproduce way more than females, just because of the whole gestation. It would take like a long time. So yeah. And so when it comes to evolutionary, males tend to compete for access to mates and just want to mate, whereas females, it's more about parental investment, about nurturing. Oh yeah, so another correlation is the activity in the ventral tegmental area and substantia nigra when it comes to testicles. They are necessary for reward, motivation, and dopamine production. And so that makes you more likely to actually care for the child. It makes the experience more rewarding. So when it comes to testicles, the higher the size, the more testosterone you can produce, and that can actually also negatively impact the nurturing abilities. And thus you would, for a high parental investment from the father, it would be better to have lower, relatively smaller testicles, as it is correlated with your nurturing abilities.
You can understand what he's saying.
I'm sorry, am I?
No, I think it's just funny, but I don't think that they're fully grasping what you're saying.
Yeah, I think sorry, okay. Yeah, it's my fault.
No.
Do you guys have any questions? And so I could just make it simple just because, yeah. You do? Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah.
So if like a person with like big balls, would they be evil? Like could they still like maybe
Sorry, what was that?
Does this correlate with being a good person or a bad person?
Well, it's because of the hormones. For example, the more the higher the testicles, the more production of testosterone, which actually affects many things. Like for example, the reason I'm talking about the ventral tegmental area, testosterone would negatively impact that part. So there would be less activity. You would not find the experience rewarding. Neither you would actually be motivated to actually take care of the kid, or so that's why I'm bringing the tegmental.
But women don't have balls and they kill their children sometimes.
Well, there are many reasons for that. Yeah.
I guess what Anthony's saying, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I guess what he's saying is that it doesn't necessarily mean that the person with smaller testicles is a better father, or the person with larger testicles is like the bad father. What it means is just that he's comparing good versus good and evil. You see? Because the higher the testosterone, the higher the aggression.
I mean, okay, so it actually makes sense that you guys are kind of confused, because it all makes sense, like in one of the second to last slide, it would all make sense why I'm actually talking about this, like, whoa, what does it have to do with good and evil? It all makes sense at the end. But of course, like, for survival of the offspring, it is actually a selective pressure to want to be able to raise the kids. Without being able to raise the kids, then it's less likely that, well, they're not going to survive. So that's why there's a selective pressure for that. Oh, another reason why it's a selective pressure, when it comes to becoming a dad, it turns out that your testosterone levels drop, and that's because it actually helps with nurturing. So yeah, according to studies there.
There's another question.
Yeah, awesome.
So does like the man just like detect that his kid is nearby? Like how does or like does just being around a kid like lower testosterone generally?
Oh, so once it is actually born, is when testosterone levels drop. But that's from a different study, and that is not this one. Yeah. But the reason why I'm saying that is because it is actually evolutionary. If the offspring is to survive, you actually need like lower testosterone because as I have mentioned, high testosterone is negatively correlated with parenting. Yeah. Sorry, did I? Yeah, for sure. So yeah, here's the data. Like the higher the testicles, caregiving goes down. The more testosterone you produce, caregiving down. And the testicle size, the higher, the more testosterone you can produce. And yeah, so I was talking about the ventral tegmental area and substantia nigra. They're actually more activated. Yeah, so now I'm talking about oxytocin vasopressin, which is actually also correlated with monogamy and parenting abilities, childbearing, friendliness, reduced aggression. So there's a difference between receptor density when it comes to pair bulls and montane meadow bulls. And for example, prairie bulls have higher density of receptors for oxytocin vasopressin, and they're monogamous, whereas montane meadow bulls have lower density of receptor and they're not monogamous. So even that affects whether you're monogamous or not.
So when you go back on the previous image, you can connect maybe this information with the brain. Yeah. And just kind of show them, because this is evolutionary psychology in a way / anthropology, so it's a bit kind of out there. So if you don't mind going over this slide again and telling them what happens in the part of the brain that you are talking about here and how that impacts the production of testosterone, or how the production of testosterone directly correlates with the part of the brain that you are referring to.
Okay, so basically, if you have lower testosterone, when it comes to the activity in the ventral tegmental area and substantia nigra, there's more likely to be activity there, and that just means that there's more dopamine production, and then there's also, you find the experience more rewarding when it comes to the offspring. Less testosterone, there isn't going to be more activity, so that actually influences that type of behavior, whether you are to take care of the kid or not. Yeah. Oh yeah, so I just also wanted to talk about aggression. There are two types of aggression, reactive and proactive. Proactive is more planned and calm, whereas reactive is more impulsive and emotional. It also has to do with your serotonin levels. When it comes to reactive aggression, low serotonin levels is associated with that kind of impulsive aggression. And so basically, if you were to reduce reactive aggression, you could just have increase the serotonin levels. I don't know, medication or just.
What's an example of planned and calm aggression?
Planned and calm? Like for example, in war, it's more of a strategy. You're really not being that emotional. You're just trying to gain something. It can be land, just. There's so many things, but it is actually better to just be calm and strategic in war. So that would be an example of proactive. Whereas reactive, it would just be impulsive. So I don't know, somebody pisses you off and you just kill him or you suck him. So yeah, that is the difference. And there's actually a selective pressure for proactive. When it comes to reactive, it is not really seen much in humans. And when it comes to chimpanzees, you actually get to see both of these types of aggression. Oh yeah, and there's this thing called the execution paradox, where proactive aggression punishes all sorts of aggression. Like for example, capital punishment. If you do certain types of aggression, I don't know, kill somebody, then in certain states, like you're more likely to be killed. So that's just like a paradox how like proactive gets to kill reactive. Oh, and the reason why we are aggression is still selective pressure is because we are actually very territorial. It is actually an advantage to be aggressive because a potential group, outside group, can actually invade and just take over, and then your genes they'll die out, and their genes would survive onto the next generation. So it is still a selective pressure, especially proactive. Oh yeah, and when it comes to proactive aggression, serotonin levels do not actually matter. For example, you can have you can have high serotonin levels, like for example, be happy, and like it doesn't really matter that type of aggression. So increasing your serotonin levels for that type of aggression wouldn't really do anything.
So would you say humans are prone to be reactive or proactive?
Proactive, yeah. There is actual selective pressures against reactive. Like for example, what I mentioned about the whole execution, our cultures tend to punish certain types of behaviors, so they will tend to punish the reactive aggression. And
How about, I cannot help but think about this. When I think reactive, I'm thinking about murders from passion. And when I'm thinking proactive, I'm thinking planning. Type 1. So this would be like a human reaction. I'm totally thinking aloud right now. I'm trying to find, because this is not even pure anthropology. This is evolutionary stuff. This is psychology, anthropology, whatever, a mix there. So I'm asking Anthony now. So reactive, it's a murder of passion. Say you run onto your mate with somebody else, you act impulsively, emotionally, and you stop them 30 times. If you're a female, or probably 300 times. Okay. A proactive would be you run into the same situation, you pull yourself back, and you plan it and execute it calmly. That's the murder with, how's it called? Premeditated. Premeditated murders have tendency to be punished more severely than impulsive murder. Right?
yeah. Actually, I would like to step back a little bit just to explain a little bit more because, okay, so when I'm talking about everything that I have talked about, I'm actually talking about the past. Okay, for example, when it comes to the brain, it was actually designed by natural selection. All that we have are a bunch of adaptations that increase survival or reproduction. And so even the mechanisms that happen, that we have, it actually offered an advantage in the past. Just because it solves certain adaptive problems that can decrease survival or reproduction. So basically, the brain that you have right now actually offered an advantage over others, and that's why you actually get to see it. And hence why I'm actually talking about, for example, proactive and reactive aggression. Right now, there's more proactive aggression than reactive. And when it comes to lower serotonin levels, usually people do not really have much serotonin levels because it would actually be a disadvantage. For example, if we were to go in the past, I don't know, let's just say that you're in a group and you're very impulsive, they just kick you out of the group and you're more likely to die. So that could be a possible consequence of having lower serotonin levels and why people in general do not have lower serotonin levels. Oh yeah, and talking about the grandmother hypotheses. So the reason why, okay, when it comes to menopause, there's a period, of course, when females can no longer have offspring, and they're still able to survive past that. The reason is because, as we talked about earlier in direct fitness, they still offer a selective advantage. They actually take care of the children, the grandkids, and so they behave in altruistic ways that actually can help the grandchildren in many ways. They can increase their survival, get more nutrients, and in return, they can actually also get more energy. When it comes to chimpanzees and humans, chimpanzees actually have higher interbirth intervals. So it takes I believe it's 6 years. So they have children every 6 years, whereas humans, I believe it's 3 years, every 3 years. Grandmothers make it so it even decreases that interval. And the reason why we're talking about grandmothers and not grandparents is because of paternity uncertainty. Grandmothers, they know that the offspring is more likely to be theirs, whereas the father or the grandfather, they're kind of uncertain because they could actually be from somebody else. So there's always that uncertainty. But of course, maybe during birth, they take away the baby, just, I don't know, circumcision or something. So there are cases where you don't even know that the child may be yours. They give you like a random child that's not even yours. So there could be cases, but it's less likely. So of the parenting. So when it comes to grandmothers, they act like in altruistic ways, whereas the grandchildren, they act in selfishness ways. Oh yeah, and I wanted to add, so the average lifespan of the chimpanzee is 50 years, whereas the average lifespan of the human is just 70 years. After a certain age, they're less likely to acquire energy, chimpanzees, whereas even when we get old, humans can still acquire energy, and so that's why they can still survive. Which has to do with connecting it again with the grandchildren. During childhood is actually an adaptation, as you're very dependent on the person, very selfish. All you do is get energy. The consequence of that is just your neural development and a skill acquisition, so that makes you live even longer. So all connects with each other again. Okay, so this is the part where I say like where I'm connecting it all. Okay, so high parental investment for females, therefore they're more choosier, and these are, when it comes to the Fisher's runaway hypothesis, females can select like a certain characteristic that they see attractive, and it would actually be seen towards the next generations. So characteristics, as I said, like being cooperative, willingness, for example, cooperative. If you have reactive impulses, if you have reactive aggression, you're not really dependable because at any moment you can lash out. So that's one thing. Cooperative, willingness to sacrifice. Well, I just wonder, like, if you guys would actually want a partner who is actually willing to sacrifice themselves for you, or would you prefer like a very selfish individual?
Why don't you ask the female?
Oh yeah. Anybody?
Females?
So, I mean, I don't want someone who's selfish, but like, I'm not looking for small testicles. Like, I'm not actively the size of like, yeah, too big. Like, I'm not like, is this this about humans? Like.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay, no, okay. So the key word, this is the key word, relative. Yeah. So this is the key word, relative. We're actually comparing chimpanzees and bonobos. As you can see, chimpanzees have way bigger testicles than humans. So when I'm talking about that, I'm actually comparing them with other species, not really just us humans. That's why I say relatively. Okay, here's like another study when it comes to females, is that in the short term, like they actually do prefer like a high amounts of testosterone. There's many characteristics that can make you infer that a male has vast amount of testosterone. So they tend to pick these characteristics in the short term. But in the study, they also found that in the long term, they actually do prefer like relatively smaller levels of testosterone. When I'm talking about smaller levels of testosterone, I'm not saying that the male actually have extremely low levels. I'm just talking compared to the people who have high amounts of testosterone. You wouldn't really want that as a partner to raise a children, just because of what I have mentioned. And so, and because there's less likely to take care of the child. And so this actually happens unconsciously. There's actually data to support that about the short term and long term. So yeah, that's another variable. Yeah, sorry. Ooh.
Anyone else? Ladies? Let's just ask a simple question to all the ladies in the room here. Would you prefer a male who is, on the long term, like, not now, but like long term, someone to raise your kids with? Someone who is reactive, meaning impulsive, it can blow up at any second, or someone who is calmer, calculated? There you go, got your answer.
So yeah, and that's why it would be.
Supporting your hypothesis right there.
So yeah, that's why it would be a selective threshold.
Oh, there's a question right there. Right there. You had a question?
I kind of forgot it already.
Oh, see, yeah.
Yeah, it was me. I kind of forgot it already.
Yeah, because of course testosterone is a selective pressure. Because, for example, defending your mate and everything.
I have my question, actually.
Yeah.
Doesn't the level of testosterone lessen as they age, though? So
Yeah.
wouldn't they eventually? I mean, eventually, give or take, I guess.
Well, that's a good question.
Like, do you know? That's what I'm kind of asking.
Oh, I do not know. Yeah.
Okay, so since we're talking about like biological reasons as for why there's nurturing behaviors and aggressive behaviors and such, and since we're talking about, childbearing and these things, father versus mother, in the case of women, like when they go through postpartum, well, some women go through postpartum depression, what would like the biological reasoning behind that? Besides like the cultural conditions of like, oh, maybe there's stuff going on around.
So can you please repeat it? I just can't.
Yeah. So, what would be like the biological factors of a woman that experiences postpartum depression? Because you said that once a woman that gives birth, their serotonin, testosterone goes down, and they become more nurturing, right? So in the case of postpartum, when there's like a rejection towards the child or something like that, what would you say?
Oh no, but when it comes to the postpartum depression, it actually signals that there's something wrong in the environment. For example, they may not have enough resources, and it all connects with the parental investment. It is actually very costly to have an offspring, and so when you actually see that the child actually wants more than you're actually willing to give, there's actual that's what happens with depression. Another thing that actually helps with it that in some cultures engage with is they eat the placenta just because of the nutrients, and according to them, it actually helps combat that and develop more affection. But of course, it actually can contain toxins and which can be detrimental for you. So, and there's not much data supporting it, but that's just from a small sample. So yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's it? Okay, so, let's ask questions, if there are any questions, because you guys, we talk about it, but we talk about it from different perspective. Anthony's doing his studies at UCSD now, and he is like having a different perspective on this.
Oh, actually, okay, so I forgot to mention, the whole argument of this, basically, all that I'm talking about this, is just, I'm basically arguing that you're more likely to do good stuff than what you consider evil, but what you consider evil does offer advantages for your survival, and thus will continue to be seen in the future. For example, early in development, it is actually a selective pressure. It is an advantage to be selfish. And later on, it becomes an advantage to be cooperative, willingness to sacrifice. Like altruism, it becomes an advantage. There's like advantages towards these two things. And another argument that I'm saying is that just because of all these, we're becoming domesticated. If not, we have already become domesticated. So yeah, those were my two arguments. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting out of this is this. So we start as selfish.
Yeah.
As children, we are very selfish as babies. We are selfish because we need to survive. So we are sucking all the nutrition from our parents, and our parents are giving it unselfishly to us, especially mothers, because they have no choice, right? And then fathers, depending on the testosterone level, are either helping or not helping, right? And then as we grow up, as we get more towards adulthood, we are learning how to become less selfish in order to procreate.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and also
Makes sense, yeah.
Children tend to be very manipulative, and
You don't know that?
oh yeah.
No. Because they're selfish.
Yeah, and then altruism, as I mentioned, from the evolutionary perspective, like I mentioned before, it may not seem that it offers a survival advantage or reproductive advantage, but it actually does. Basically, people have actually wondered, well, altruism does not make sense. For example, if you were to actually sacrifice yourself to the point where you actually die, and then your genes are no more, well,
Makes no sense, yeah.
yeah, from a natural selection point of view, but from a natural selection point of view, it actually does make sense because your similar alleles will still continue. So it does make sense. And yeah.
But only if you're a mother. The only altruistic situation in nature that is very well recorded and supported is mothers being very altruistic if they're having children. So mother is, and in some cases fathers are willing to sacrifice their life for their child because they already passed their genes on. We see that in animal kingdom and we see that in humans, but that's highly cultural.
And then another concept is just neoteny, which just means the retention of youthful characteristics, which also has a selective advantage in terms of reproductive success, especially in females. If you look younger, you're more likely to reproduce just because it signals fertility. So when it comes to these characteristics, all of these, my argument, all of these are making us domesticated. Compared to a chimpanzee, we're very weak. Chimpanzees are very strong. There's many selective pressures as I mentioned, that are making us become domesticated. And yeah.
Any questions? Okay, there are questions in the back there too.
What's your solution for us not to be domesticated?
Well, no, there's no. In my opinion, there's no solution. It's just like, for example, there's even more selective pressures that do not really have to do with humans. For example, agriculture. Well, it does have to do with humans, but it was like a consequence of, for example, weaker teeth. There was no longer selective pressure for having like robust teeth. So there's like so many variables that are just making us.
So he's not
weaker.
talking about not being strong as a man or as a person. He's talking about being weaker biologically in comparison to animals that
Yeah.
have higher testosterone.
Yeah.
They're just alligators.
Yeah, so there's another question there in the back.
So is the argument that, like, at the end of the day, humans have free will, so they can do whatever they wish, but are these, like, biological factors, like, playing a part? Like, is it, you need more self-control when you have higher testosterone?
Oh, okay. So for example, when it comes to, sorry, can you just repeat?
No, I'm basically trying to say, like,
Yeah, she can
because
say that.
obviously people have said, well, I know men who are good fathers, I know women who have done terrible things to kids. So is it, are these things like a sealed fate, or is it?
No, well, it's just, it all has to do with statistics. Like on average, of course, yeah, that's the way it is. But there's always outliers, and that doesn't mean that just because you have a lot of testosterone means that you're not going to take care of your children. It just means that you're more likely to not. So it's all statistics. There's always people who are not on the part of the average.
It's a cultural.
Yeah.
It's very, very cultural. What
Also
culture
that-
is assuming is stronger.
So the more testosterone you have, the more likely you are to leave your kid, basically.
I mean, you can engage in that behavior. You're more likely to.
More likely to.
More likely to. Like the behavior is complex because everybody's different,
Yeah.
but it can lead to that kind of behavior.
There's
Or it can just,
correlation.
yeah,
I got you.
or it can just lead to you just being with them, but you're not really do not really care about.
Investing.
Yeah. So
No
it's,
child support, basically.
oh, and that's like culture. So
That's cultural. Yeah, don't touch into
Yeah.
that's dangerous.
And-
That's dangerous.
yeah, but remember, guys, I'm actually talking about the past. So what you see right now is just because of the past. And so I really wonder where we're actually heading because there's so many new variables that are influencing this.
questions right here.
Oh, so isn't that like testosterone isn't linked with parenting? Isn't it more like it's linked with emotional responses and your like emotional intelligence and how much emotion you can feel with your child? Is that why
Well-
it's linked to like leaving your kid? Because it's like if I don't care about my kid, I wouldn't care if I left. Like you know, is that what it is?
Well, okay, so for example, testosterone, the more testosterone you have, the more likely you are to do other types of behaviors. For example, just focusing on mating. When it comes to energy, you were just focusing on reproduction. So you would just try to, of course, mate with other females instead of just getting that energy and putting it towards like developing an offspring. So that would just make you more likely to do that behavior than this behavior, which is why I also mentioned about testosterone decreasing in new fathers, just because if it decreases, then you're more likely to nurture it. So yeah.
Think about grandparents versus parents.
So it kind of like testosterone kind of inhibits like your emotional capacity with like parents?
It's
Well,
how
I
your
don't know.
brain reacts, yeah?
But it can also lead to. It has its pros and its cons.
Yeah.
It can make you maybe aggressive, high levels of testosterone. So there's like so many factors that that can influence it.
Highly cultural.
That's
There's a
what I was
question
gonna
there
ask.
and then there is a question there.
I was gonna ask, is it just, like, it's not just testosterone in males at least that affect their parenting nurture style, or whether or not they leave their kid, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So like, do you know, cause I know you just focused on testosterone specifically for the presentation, but do you know if there's like anything like other, like going on in the brain ability or whatever that affects, that has that same effect basically on males or females, since, you know, it's kind of both.
Yeah, females actually are more likely to have oxytocin and vasopressin. They're kind of designed just to be more nurturing, just because of the whole parental investment. Whereas, for example, the eggs, as I mentioned, like in they're actually small quantity and large, whereas males, but it's a high amount of quantity, where it's and so that actually affects your that's another factor affecting your style. Males more likely to mate, whereas females are more likely to focus on parenting. And so, yeah, we just have, males have different adaptations than females, basically, just because of the selective pressures. Yeah.
Here's another question, Jack.
Wait, I was gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong, but something that you can compare, like as an example, like with testosterone and how that causes you to behave is like when we learned about Jacob's syndrome, right?
Yep.
That gives you like high testosterone and they were more violent.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Good connection right there. There you go. Any other questions? I'll give him a hand.